when you go into a commercial bank, you typically do a credit training program, especially back when I did it, which was in the 90s. So I did a 2-year, pretty rigorous credit training program, and we bounced around. The analysts is what they called us. We bounced around from different groups within the bank, workouts, commercial lending, small business lending, real estate. So that was our background. We also did a formal credit training program. In this case, it was Comerica Bank, and back then they were headquartered out of Detroit. So the analysts ended up going to Detroit in February for about 6 weeks, and literally probably one of the coldest 6 weeks that I've been involved in a long time. Just as a side note, as we go to work, we'd put on a jacket and then a scarf and then hat and then gloves and then goulashes, which are these rubber things that protect your feet, your shoes, your nice shoes. And you get into the car and you crank the heat up. Well, then everyone gets hot. So you take all that stuff off. And then you get where you're going, and then you'd put it all back on so you could walk 50 yards to the building, and then you take it. So it seemed like we spent all our time putting on clothes and taking them off. But I ended up going to, so I graduated from the credit analyst program in Dallas after about a year. And then at that time, the bank had purchased another bank in Houston. And so I ended up moving to Houston, finishing out the credit training program downtown, and then was a commercial lender for about a year and a half. And then I left to go into the commercial finance business or factoring business.
Yeah.
And so that's really my background. That's where I made the capital, earned the capital to get into transition to the private lending business, which is what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
And in the factoring business, worked for a small commercial finance company for, about 3-4 years, and we sold it to a bank. And then we had a contract to work with that bank for a while. Then I went for another bank. And then my last job was with a local bank that had multiple affiliates outside of Texas. So I was responsible for what we called the affiliate markets. And so I was traveling to California, Colorado, Utah, managing the people that reported to me in that business. And then I left in 2019 to do this full time. It was the right time for me. Along that journey, just kind of going back a little bit, when we were the private finance company, before we sold to the bank, we had started a real estate fund back in the early 2000s, and we had some investors. And then after a couple of years, it just didn't work out. So we ended up selling the portfolio to a local businessman who was in the business, the private lending business. And so that's really where I learned what I'm doing now. And he had told us, if you run across an opportunity that you think fits, send it to me. We'll try to do it. We'll try to finance it. And then you can participate if you want. So over the years, 10 or so years, see an opportunity, send it to him, got a chance to participate. And that's really how I learned the business. Now, of course, when you're doing it part-time, passive, it's a lot different than when you're doing it full-time, like I'm doing it now.
Yeah. So you had this formal training in credit from a banking perspective. So you're a numbers guy to begin with. And you decide to get into the real estate private lending side. And we hear this all the time now, Jack. Everybody's doing hard money lending or they're doing flips. So I'd like for you to kind of explain to everybody listening to the show what that's like. So you lend money, or you're a private lender specifically in the real estate business. So walk us through what that looks like. Who's borrowing this money? What kind of projects are being completed with this money? What's the ecosystem look like?
Yeah, and that's a lot of, in one question, that's
sure.
a lot of stuff. But I'll try to go where you want me to go. There's a difference in private lending between homestead financing and investor financing. And as it should be, when you're financing somebody's homestead, the laws and the rules, regulations are a lot different. They're a lot stringent, as they should be. And you got to have a license. And that's a different kind of private money financing that there are certainly people in town that do that. I don't. I try to stay away, or I don't at all because I'm not licensed. And if you do a homestead loan and you're not licensed, that, fines and jail time, et cetera. So I strictly work with investors and investors, mostly in Houston. Most of my loans are in Houston. And really private money, the way I'm doing it is short-term debt financing for a bridge scenario where maybe you can't get traditional bank financing for whatever reason. A lot of banks don't like doing short-term small construction loans. They don't like doing cash-out loans, land loans, and so they're not willing to take that risk, maybe for the cream of the crop borrower, but everybody else, they're really not interested in doing that. So that's where the private lending industry exists, and really recently has flourished. Again, as a side note, I was at our industry conference was in Vegas in November, and it's American Association of Private Lenders. And there were about, throughout the country, everybody comes to that event every year, and there were probably 1,000 people this year, which I think they set a record again. So the industry is growing, and part of that is just access to capital. And the banks, especially now when we're in a recession and you're seeing a lot of pullback by the banks, it's hard for the average person, right, to have access to capital. So that's where the private lending industry really thrives. But for me, because of our cost to our borrowers, it's certainly more expensive than traditional bank financing. So they use it as a bridge. And if they can take our money and make money, then it certainly makes sense for them to do a transaction. But a lot of my investors, clients, borrowers, they're either doing a fix and flip, like you see on TV. They're buying a house, they're going to fix it up and then sell it. They're doing what I call rehab and rent, which is more attractive these days because of the way the market is. It's soft, as you know, so it's a lot harder, at least in the short term, to sell a house. It's easier maybe to rent it, get some cash flow coming in, and then long term hope for appreciation, and then at that point you can sell it. Or some of my clients are buying land to sit on, and maybe they'll build, maybe they'll flip, depends on the location, or they're doing a commercial cash out where they're just trying to bring in some liquidity. Banks typically don't like doing cash out loans, so they'll use, again, a private lender to do that, and then maybe they're going to take that money, they've got another project or whatever they're going to do, but they've got this asset that's got equity in it, and that's the only way they can access that liquidity. Maybe they spent 20 years paying down debt, and all of a sudden they need more, and they can't get it through a traditional type financing source. So those are kind of, just in a broad sense, those are kind of the areas, 4 areas that you'll see a typically private money on my level. And my loans aren't that big on average, a couple $100,000. So most of the people I'm financing are active in, the 3rd Ward and the 5th Ward and Sunnyside and East Side. And some, I'm not doing a whole lot of activity in River Oaks or Tanglewood, but clearly, some of the bigger players in the industry, they're doing the large apartment complexes. I think I saw the other day there was a bank that was trying to close on a huge purchase of a multifamily unit in Houston, maybe $9 million. And for whatever reason, at the last minute, that fell out. The loan to value was good, so they were able to find a large private lender to come in, again on a short-term basis, and close that transaction for them.
Yeah. So a couple of things I'm noticing, and maybe you're noticing this as well. One is the number of transactions, home sales in the Houston area have come down significantly year over year, and I'm sure it's the case nationally. And then the second thing is, as you mentioned, with liquidity kind of pulling back with the banks, access to capital, probably Yep. There's less access to capital. What are you seeing here as far as Houston and these folks that do these fix and flips and the rentals? Has their transactions come down as well? What's going on in the market today?
Overall, and I'll just say macro level as well as Houston, there's a shortage of housing, clearly. And that's not going to change anytime soon. The challenge now is for a lot of people that own homes, they have golden handcuffs because their rate is 3%. So for them to move up to buy a fix and flip, maybe in a different neighborhood, now they've got to pay 6 or 7% on their interest. And so the sellers of a lot of these properties, they saw what it was like It was kind of the Wild West for the last 2 years. And so the sellers of properties are living like it's 2021. The buyers, on the other hand, are seeing, they're reading the negative news. They're seeing what's going on in the stock market and the rates. And so there's just a total miss on what the value is right now. I'm seeing a lot of, for a lot of reasons. Interest rates has a lot to do with that. And so that in turn has slowed down a lot of the transactions. So, if we can get that equilibrium and if rates will come down, you'll see transactions pick up substantially. But right now, there's just less buyers and less sellers, but the demand is still there. However, I saw, I think it was today or yesterday, that if you look at home sales, just, generally home sales throughout the country, from this time, from December of 22 to December of 21, sales were down 40%, which is crazy. That's a big number.
You're talking about transactions.
Transactions, sales trend, yeah. But if you look at November to December, for the first time since May, sales were up 2%. So which tells you that maybe there's a bottom as far as the amount of transactions that are happening, but also that's a function of rates. Now interest rates in July or so were maybe at 7, or September. Now they've come down to 6. So just that small little change in interest rate dramatically affects the marketplace as it is now. So before I was here, I was working on a rental property that I bought from one of my clients. And so my personal thought is that long term, we're going to get inflation, you're going to get appreciation in values. And so now's really a good time if you've got some capital, if you've got access to capital, to buy some properties, again, bring in some cash flow, and then, use the depreciation and the expenses that you can use with a rental property, but also, again, hope for the appreciation as well as the cash flow every year. But I'm seeing more of my clients have a hard time selling their fix and flips once they're done. And a year ago, it was pretty much as soon as they put the sign out up front, it was gone. Or even before that, I had probably the biggest success story that I had financed. They were halfway done, and this was probably a year and a half ago. They were halfway done with the construction. They had a neighbor come down and say, I know somebody wants to buy your house. We'll offer X. And so they ended up on that flip making $60,000 on again, a couple $100,000 flip. I think they bought it for, all in, we're in for 200, maybe sold it for 270, 280, so less costs, et cetera. So, but those days are pretty much gone for any time soon. And so you're seeing now borrowers that are flippers that are done, and now you've got carrying costs. And so they've got to pay insurance, they've got to pay taxes, they've got to pay interest. And so, like everybody, they don't have unlimited cash. And so for them to either sell it to somebody like me who will take that property and rent it, or themselves, as long as they can get financing and use that to lower the rate, because my rate's going to be higher than a long-term, say, rental rate. And so if you do that, then you've got the opportunity at least to kind of ride out this short-term lack of transaction in Houston, and maybe 2-3 years down the road, things will change. If I had to be in any market, Houston would certainly be, for me at least, on the top 10. Now, California, you'll go to, right, and you get appreciation of 40% some years, and then it's down 30%, and overall, so there's wild swings. But being in Houston, we know for the most part that we're really not going to go down that much, up maybe consistently. So you look at Texas in general, it's an attractive place. Austin, certainly the exception, as far as people wanting to move there, because maybe it reminds a lot of people from the West that, it's like home, so they want to move there, and, the politics, et cetera. Austin's a great place, don't get me wrong. But as far as just stability and prices, Houston hasn't gone up a whole lot, and it hasn't gone down. Certain areas, there's exceptions. And so that really makes it long-term a great place to either buy or invest or get a house.
So I want to go back to something you said about carrying costs, which is very interesting to me. I'll get your opinion on this. So all these folks that are fix and flips, or they're taking these bridge loans because they don't have the cash, so they're taking the bridge with the idea of flipping it. Now all of a sudden they may be stuck a little bit longer. They got these carrying costs. At some point, do you think that all of a sudden all this inventory is going to flood the market and drive prices down, or is the inventory high? What are you seeing?
So along your thought process, right, is that there's houses out there that are just waiting to be put on the market, and whether somebody is holding them because they're renting them, and then once the market changes, they want to put it on the market, or for whatever reason. Yeah. In general, right, as we discussed, there's just a lack of transactions now. So at some point, maybe the market's flooded. Could happen, no doubt. But again, there's a shortage of housing overall. So even if there is a glut of new houses hitting the market, it's not enough for people. In long term, I think people want to own a house. Now, it depends on the generation. And, I've got kids that are millennials and Zs, and they may think differently. They just want to rent and have that flexibility. But I just think as they get older, they're going to want to have a house. Now, again, it may not be owned, but they're going to want to be in a house. So I don't think, again, the stability of Houston is such that there's not going to be a dramatic swing.
Okay, and that's interesting because we've seen the number of transactions come down, but the prices haven't come down at the same rate. Right. And so is it because everyone's moving to Houston? Are we growing too fast for the home builders, or all of the above?
Supply and demand.
Supply and demand, yeah.
But the other thing is there is some detachment from reality for the sellers, because their neighbor a year ago sold their house for X and they missed out on the boat, and they're upset because they don't want to sell for less than that. And so it just takes people a while.
But where are they going to go?
Right.
That's the problem, right? So even if they sell, where are they going to go?
Exactly. And so there's instead of people selling and then they pull, a year ago and they pull out $100,000 and then now they can move up, or they move down the road and still rates are 3%. So the golden handcuffs, as I talked about earlier, if you're at 2-3, my oldest son's at 3% or 2.9 at his house. And, why would you ever, if you didn't have to, why would you ever leave for that rate? I mean, it's just crazy. It's like free money almost for him. So,
yeah.
But there are people moving. So to your point, there are people still moving to Houston. There's a lot of people moving to Texas. As you look at just the, and I'm not here to talk politics, but if you just look at the political environment, there's a lot of attraction for a lot of people in the country to come here and, lower taxes and lower cost of living. And if you believe, at least in the short term, being the next, 10 to 20 years, that energy, that we're pulling out of the ground is not going to go anywhere anytime soon. There's going to be demand for that. And I know there's a transition going on, and that's going to happen someday. But for now, at least in the short term, there's still demand for those jobs, and there's, good jobs.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the different types of projects that a private lender may finance. So you mentioned cash outs as one of them. And I would think, if you have equity in your home, most traditional banks should be able to give you a home equity line of credit, but that doesn't seem to be the case, right? So why would somebody that needs a cash out go down the private lender route versus the traditional bank?
Yeah, so keep in mind, again, I'm not doing homestead loans.
Right.
So yes, if they need a private equity or a home equity loan, then the first place that they go is the bank or the credit union. Now, there are private lenders that do the home equity loans, but as you would expect, and I think it's great, the laws and the limitations on qualification and what a private lender can do as far as terms on that home equity are pretty restrictive, again, as they should be. So that's an option. But when I talk about cash out, it's somebody who maybe has an investment property that's free and clear and has no liens. And so they're trying to pull money out of that because they're going to take that money and maybe they're going to buy another investment property, or a commercial property where I talked to somebody the other day, they have to build a flood retention pond. And so they went to the bank, they didn't qualify or whatever, and so now they're trying to pull $500,000-$600,000 out of the property cash so they can build this retention pond, which is going to add value to the property because of the way it's structured now, the layout of the property. So there's hundreds of different reasons why people need a cash out, but it's typically something that the bank won't do.
Okay. So I want to ask your opinion on something. So, Jack, you probably get these phone calls. I get these phone calls. Some random number calling us and saying, we want to buy your house. Who are these people? That's what I want to know. It seems like everybody is trying to buy my house.
Clients, right?
We get those calls all the time as well. I get them on properties that I don't even own.
Yeah.
And so it's the information available to databases, the people that are running, if I wanted to find out who you were from your cell phone, I mean, the information is easy to get. There's ways to match your cell phone to you, to your house, where you live, or your investment properties, your companies. It's all intertwined. So, but that industry, they're wholesalers, real estate wholesalers. And they're the ones that will buy. You see the signs on the side of the road. We buy your houses for cash, cheap, avoid foreclosure, whatever it is. And they're the ones that can go to and close quick. And they go to homeowners and they offer a good solution for somebody who doesn't know what to do. They want to sell fast. They're worried about whatever scenario. Maybe they got tax issues or some kind of scenario where they've got to move fast. So wholesalers are very active in the market, and they sell to investors.
Okay, so that's what I was going to ask you. So these folks that are making the phone calls, they're not the ones that actually have the money, right? They're brokering this. They have an investor that has the cash. So they're just putting you under contract with zero intention of them ever buying it. They're locking you in and getting money from somebody else, right?
They'll take an assignment contract. So they'll buy, sometimes they'll do a double close at the title company, so they don't have to come up with any cash. But for them to secure the house, the seller, and then they've got a whole list of investors, people that are willing to buy. And then if those investors don't have capital, then they can call people like me to help fund the investor that's buying this house that they secured to sell. And I've worked with wholesalers before, but they'll take an assignment fee. And that could be anywhere from, $25,000 to $5,000 to, more than 25. But the average now, because there's a lot of wholesalers, there's really no barriers to entry in that business. And so you just have to be, good on the phone and, persistent. And some of those wholesalers are extremely successful. But the average wholesaling fee has come down a lot. It's probably, $5,000 to $10,000 now, which is still a lot of money, but you've got to do a lot of those transactions to keep the lights on. But anybody, like I said, there's no barriers to entry. So anybody with a phone and information, they can be a wholesaler. And they don't have to be from around here. They can be anywhere.
Yeah. So I recall when I purchased my last house, went to escrow to close, and there's all these documents. I probably initialed, I don't know, hundreds of pages, and I probably shouldn't be telling this to an attorney here, but I didn't read. I just initialed and signed. When you're doing these private lending deals, is it the same process? Do you go to escrow? Do you do your own? What's the paperwork like?
The last set of documents that I had my borrower sign was probably 75 pages. So there's no shortage of documents that they're going to sign. But I have an attorney, and they prepare the loan documents just like any loan attorney would, and then we close at a title company and get a title commitment, title policy. And so there's people that have been doing this a long time that some don't use a title company, some close without.
That's surprising.
Quick claim deed,
Okay.
which most title companies won't underwrite if you get a quick claim deed. And so, but I'm trying to get a survey, try to get an appraisal, just like any other real estate transaction.
So that's why, dovetailing on that. So if I'm an investor and I want to come to you for capital, you mentioned kind of some standard real estate diligence, title insurance, survey. But what are you looking for from me as the investor? Are you looking at my personal credit? are you inspecting the deal and trying to see that the same value I'm trying to see? What's your process like in trying to see if my deal is something that you want to partner with me on?
That's a great question, because that gets to my underwriting, right? So a lot of it is tangible, but there's some intangibles. Being in the banking finance business a long time, a lot of it's just gut feel. What do you say? How do you say it? How do you carry yourself? How do you act? Little hints, things that tell me they're good and bad, that I can, and it's hard to, in one meeting, right, to get a really good feel for somebody, but that hopefully is one of the things that I do well. And I'm not right all the time, but try to get a good read on somebody. And so what we do as private lenders ultimately is about the collateral, which in this case we'll call it residential property. So it's really about the collateral. So are you secure on the collateral? Again, survey, appraisal. I try to be at 75% loan to value, or if they're constructing a rehab project, 75% of what's called ARV, after repaired value. And so I want to, just looking at, make sure we close it a title company, there's no liens, taxes are paid, et cetera. So just like any other real estate transaction, any other bank, wouldn't do anything different. However, I want to see the property. So if it's in town, I'm going to go see it before I finance it. I'm going to meet you if I haven't met you before. And when you first start out, like I did in 2019, I didn't have any relationships. So it's kind of hard, dealing with existing clients, but that's really my preference. And that's kind of what I've evolved to, is not only existing clients, repeat business, but if you're an existing client and you say, hey, I know this guy, Bill, he's, talk to him, I referred him. So that's not, be all end all, that's a good borrower, but it certainly helps, instead of just meeting you randomly or you call me because you looked at my website. So relationships, I'm a lot about relationships in my underwriting process. But it gets, what we do as a private lender, if you're just financing a cash out, if you're just financing an existing property where there's no construction, then I wouldn't say it's easier, but it is a lot easier, because the value is probably not going to change a whole lot. And, so the collateral certainly is number one. And then the character, ultimately, right, the person is what's probably going to get you paid back. Now, if that doesn't work, if your character, I misjudged your character, then that's going to create some problems. But hopefully I can fall back on the collateral. So yes, I run your credit. And again, people are financing typically in this industry, not because they're not bankable. And so maybe their credit's not the best, but my experience has been, it's not necessarily the credit score, it's why the credit score is like it is. So medical and, slow pays on credit cards, I get that. You're trying to run a business, you're trying to grow, maybe you went to your credit card and that's your working capital. So there's certain things from a credit perspective, at least with me, that are okay, if that's the right word. Some things are not. If there's a bankruptcy, if there's lawsuits, judgments, child support liens, that kind of stuff, then certainly that's a different conversation with the borrower. So character. And then on a construction project where you're doing a rehab or you're doing a flip, and this is part of the lending process that I basically had no experience. So a lot of this I'm have learned along the way, or learned the hard way. But it's understanding, how much experience do you have, or are you using a contractor that has experience in doing this project, this type of project? Are you just stripping the floors, repainting, adding new fixtures in the bathroom, easy stuff, I would say? Or are you doing a major move in walls, foundation repair? And so for me, the more work you're doing like that, I need to make sure that you obviously know what you're doing, or the contractor, and then I'm going to have an inspector that's involved in the process, and I want to make sure that my inspector is comfortable with what you're doing. He's going to look at the work. If it's not done to his satisfaction, we're going to make sure it's done going forward. You're going to fix it before the next draw, and so I'll fund the rehab or the construction project in draws. Work's done, we go out and look, make sure there's no issues, make sure everybody's paid, fund the draw. And so early on in that process, I send my inspector out. I may go out. One, it's an opportunity for me to see, and that's what I like to do anyways. I usually spend a day or two in the field. I like doing that. Develop the relationship with my borrower so I get to know him more. What's he thinking? Is there stress? And you know, how are things going out there? You go out and there's nobody there, then obviously that's a problem. And so later on in the process, when I'm doing the draws, a lot of times I'll just get pictures or maybe a video. I don't need to be there to see that you painted and you put cabinets up. You can send me a picture of that, and then again, I'll fund the draw on that. So there's not just one thing. There's a lot of in my underwriting, there's a lot of things I look at, but really so the two things really are just my gut feel. One, intangible, and then tangible, it's the collateral. At the end of the day, that's what's going to get you paid back. Or if I have to, unfortunately, sometimes I have to take the property, then I want to make sure that the value's there where I can either sell it or rent it.
Yeah, so a lot of people, especially when money was flowing last couple of years, they got into the real estate, quote unquote, real estate business, you know, flips,
right,
and all that good stuff. And a lot of times they want to do it. They want to go at it themselves, use their own money, or use money of friends and family. But from listening to you talk, one of the things that's stuck with me is borrowing money from somebody like you who comes from a credit background, but also is in the real estate business, understands it. You're kind of providing some safeguards for them, right? Because you're saying, hey, I'm not going to give you this money because I see these red flags potentially. The loan to value is not there. Whereas if I'm doing it myself, I'm a novice and I go to friends and family and I get their money, I may get myself in trouble. Yep. Would you say that that's something where for a novice person that if they've never done a deal like this or they're very new at this, that's a big danger given the Wild West nature of the industry itself?
Yep. And I do finance some people that have been in the business a long time, but I finance a lot of people where it's their first, it's their second. And so a couple of years ago, I said, well, how can I really relate to my borrowers unless I've done my own flip? So that's what I did. I did my own and made all the mistakes. So I can go back and tell them, listen, you should do this because this is what may happen. And, you know, for example, the foundation, I've made those mistakes where I just kind of, the foundation looks good. Or, you know, the guy said, foundation is so critical to, especially if you're on, you know, a pier and beam or a block and beam, and getting that right is, I've had to go back and fix the foundation. Well, when you are done with a house and you have to fix the foundation and you move everything, what happens? Well, everything cracks and moves, and so you got to repaint and re-drywall and maybe your plumbing. So again, having done a lot of those things wrong, I can go back to my borrower and say, so I think I add value to them. So it's not just, hey, here's the money, you know, make sure you pay me. It's, I like the business. I'm in the business. Not only have I done a couple flips myself, I've got rental properties now, and so I can relate to some of those. And here's what I would do. And part of it, again, is underwriting. I went to a house, and it needed major rehab, and the borrower didn't think that it needed a whole lot. And I said, well, here's what I'm going to require you to do. You're going to have to fix this. You're going to have to reframe. And so by the time we were done, he's like, wow, my budget's not even close to what I have to do. So he pulled out of the deal. And so I think I did him a favor so he didn't get involved, and he was going to be way over budget, and then the house wasn't going to be the kind of value that he thought. So again, it's more part of the relationship for me is providing value. The only way I can do that is if I can say I've been in the business, I've done these. And so it's a combination of lending plus also having assets. So I don't know if that was your question.
Well, no, that's exactly what it was. Is, you know, if someone's doing it as a novice, they're going to learn the hard way, right? Versus, you know, when someone's doing new construction, oftentimes they'll get a construction loan, and the bank, because they know what the construction process looks like, adds somewhat of a checks and balances. Whereas if you're doing it on your own money, you can make all the mistakes in the world, and there's nobody to check you until it's too late.
I saw, so a year or so ago, right, anybody. And that's what I thought. That's why I did mine. You know, for the other reason why I did mine, I'm like, you just have to fog a mirror and you can show up and do a flip and make, you know, $20,000. You know, by the time I was done, though, the market had passed me by. And so that theory was incorrect. But there was a stretch of time where, yes, I've never done this before. I've got another job. Hey, call me when you're done and I'll collect my check for $50,000. That happened.
Yeah.
That's not realistic,
Yeah.
right? And so what I've seen just through my experience is there's three things primarily that sucks out all the profit of a flip, at least in the size transactions that I'm doing. One is your carrying costs. If you spend too long paying your interest, you're paying your insurance, paying your tax. If your project goes out too long, that'll take a big chunk of your profit. Now, obviously, you can't control which way the market's going up or down. That's kind of the unknown, and you're betting a little bit anyways. That's part of the risk. Number two, that'll take all the profit is your general contractor. So if you hire a GC, they're going to take, 10 to 20%, 15% of the total work that they're doing. And so on average, again, in the types of transactions that I'm working in, it's probably $20,000. So that's a big chunk, right? So if you are a and I finance a lot of guys that are general contractors. So they got their own guys that are in, and so they're running the crews. So they've automatically just taken that cost out of the equation because they're the GCs. Or if you're a novice, you can run your own subs. I've done that. It's not easy. You end up with a lot of guys that maybe you wouldn't use because you're a novice and you don't really know, is this plumber good? Is he not good? And you kind of learn the hard way, but that's another way to save that cost. And then the third way is if you use a real estate broker, and nothing against real estate brokers, but the fact is if you're selling, you've got to pay that 3%. And so your transaction, if you're selling the property, is 6 typically, buyer, seller, broker, and then 1% usually at the title company. So that's 7%. So if you can take out 3, and a lot of people do that because their spouse maybe is a real estate broker, or they know somebody, or maybe they are. And so if you can take out at least one of those, like if you're a general contractor and you do your own flip and you use a broker and maybe your project goes on a little bit longer, you're almost guaranteed to make $20,000, $30,000 just because you're not having to pay somebody else. So those are the areas that, they don't really tell you this on HGTV, but those are kind of the 3 areas that you've got to manage. And I'm not a real estate agent. I've used agents before. There's nothing wrong with an agent, but fortunately on my last flip, I was lucky enough to know somebody that knew somebody that wanted to buy. And so I did seller financing on the purchase. So again, automatically I pick up 3%. So those are just kind of some areas where you can, if you're really drilling down on the budget, you can hopefully get in front of and manage that going in just to make sure it's a profitable transaction.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I can't help but when I'm on the highway and I turn on the radio, I hear about some real estate investing, real estate seminar where they'll teach you how to make millions of dollars in real estate and be set for life. Now, be careful how you answer this, but what is that industry all about? What are they selling, or what are they teaching?
So like a lot of industries, there's good and bad. And there's a lot of investors that do that. And in my opinion, they wouldn't do that if there wasn't value and they weren't making money. So that industry to me serves a great need. And a lot of it's for passive investors. You've got your job, you're an attorney, you're a doctor, so you don't, but you want to diversify, or you want to come up with another scenario where you're reading about real estate all the times and online or in Forbes, Wall Street Journal. How do I get into this? I don't really know. And a lot of people, me included, right, they've done an investment maybe outside of the stocks and it's gone badly for them. Lost money, or somebody stole, or it was a fraud or whatever. It just happens if you're in that game. So, how do you come up with a way to invest in real estate? And so some of these groups, they do it all for you. They find the property, they've got the financing lined up. They will help you, guide you along the way on the construction if you're building, and if you're going to sell, they'll find an agent and they'll pretty much do everything. All you have to do is, again, the trust is a big factor there, but you provide the money unless, you're going to borrow some, but you're going to have to put some of your own money in. Obviously, you're comfortable with the numbers. You get to pick where you want to be. Are you in the second ward? Are you over in Katy, whatever? And then they pretty much do it all. So
how does that jive, though, with what we just talked about, those 3 things that eat into your margins?
Right.
If you're hiring these other folks to do it, now they're taking a cut of everything.
Yep.
isn't that shrinking the what you're able to do from these transactions?
So there's no real estate's gray. It's not black and white. The people that I know that are the companies that are doing that, one way is, so two ways that I'm familiar with. One is they're buying the property right. And that kind of trumps everything. I can be wrong. I can have a project that goes on too long. I can use a general contractor. But if I buy it right, and a lot of those transactions when you're buying real estate as an investor, a lot of them are off market. Wholesalers buy off market. So maybe they bought the property from a wholesaler. They're calling. They catch me at the right time. I just want out of this house. I don't want to list with a real estate agent because I got to fix it. So they sell, and maybe you're buying at a really good price. So that allows enough margin pretty much for everybody if they can do that. So that's one way. The other way that I've seen is their construction costs are very competitive. If I was to go out and find a general contractor and he was going to build for me, that cost is going to be, especially because I'm not a repeat volume buyer, it's going to be a lot higher than if I use one of these companies. They've got their own crew, they got their own guys. And so what I've seen is their construction budget is very competitive. And so those are two of the things. And I don't know as far as how they sell, if they've got a special rate for you. If you use their broker, maybe it's less. But those seem to be two of the ways that they add value. And then, they just access to capital too. And so, instead of me going out, and trying to go to the internet or whatever and find somebody who's got capital, that they do a good job of finding, they give you options. And so they're competitive options in the marketplace.
So if you could share with us a success story of how private lending could help somebody who, they need to do a cash out or they want to do a flip. Share, what's one of your favorite stories that you've been able to help people with?
I've helped a lot of people, so that's kind of nice. I've financed some, just land is one of them. And I can probably find a success story in each one, each different type of, project, fix and flip, rehab and rent, cash out, land. But I know I have a borrower that I financed some land, and land, typically it takes a long time to appreciate, but they were able to buy in the right spot. Couldn't get a bank to finance it for them, and the land is probably appreciated 25% a year. And it's close to the East River project, which is down Clinton Drive and on the east side of town, navigation by the old NEDFAs in there. Some of the things that are going on in Houston is just crazy. And so a lot of the success stories not only are buying right, but just being in the right location, right? The 3 L's of real estate: location, location, location. I have a customer, actually they're wholesalers. They don't buy and flip properties anymore, but this property that I helped them buy, financed it, was over off north of downtown a little bit. 610, just north of downtown, Fulton, I think, that area. And they literally bought this house. It was overgrown with trees and weeds. And so they got a landscaper out there. They just cut everything back, make it look nice, painted, added a new door, and they sold it. And this is, again, about a year ago, but they must have made $40,000. So there is some of that, as crazy as it sounds, where if you just have the vision, you buy a house, make it curb appeal. You just make the curb appeal nice, and there's enough margin in there where now, if I'm driving by, but it was an investor that bought it because it still needed a lot of work. But after the curb appeal, then people could see, there's potential in this property. So a lot of the most successful scenarios are those that they typically know what they're doing because they've been doing it a while, but experience is part of that is because you've failed and you've made the mistakes. Right. So that's how you have the experience, but they have to have the vision. I know what's going on in the market. I know this part of town. So it's the vision. Anybody can buy a house that's already done and complete and in Katy and, which is one of the most popular markets in the whole country, and just sit there. And but having the vision to see a piece of real estate, whether it's land or a fix and flip, that's the hard part. And so that's why it's so hard to be successful because a lot of people either don't want to do it or they can't see it. And then, they don't have access to the tools to get the property.
So that's what I was going to ask you next is for the average person that one day wakes up, they have some extra cash and they're like, I want to get into the real estate business. Everyone's making money. That's their attitude.
Yeah.
Where does the average person get in trouble if they decide that they want to take a shot at, being in this industry? What gets them in trouble?
It's easy to get in trouble. Doesn't matter, especially if you got some money.
Dave Ramsey has that, the guy about not getting into debt and stuff. His whole backstory is about how he made a lot of money financing real estate, and then I don't know if you guys are you guys familiar with this?
Yeah. I don't know the story. I mean, I know who Dave Ramsey is, but I don't know the story.
The general background, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, is he became very wealthy on paper because of the real estate business and access and the ability to finance and cash out. But to me, this story is he just overdid it and he did it too fast, right?
Right.
Because if the market's really going up and you, just like in the stock market, it's never going to go down. One day it does, and you were way ahead and now you're way behind. It's
hard. I have the same issue. Is wanting to deploy all my capital because that means more money.
Right.
And, I've got bills to pay, whatever. And so, but having cash on the sidelines not only allows you to find better opportunities, but inevitably in this business, you're going to have a problem. And so I borrow from banks, and I tell the bank I'm doing A, B, and C, and there's covenants and compliance. And so if for some reason whatever I'm financing falls outside of compliance, then I've got to have some liquidity to solve that problem, or else I've got a problem with the bank, and that's my lifeblood. So basically I'm not a Warren Buffett. I take my notes and then I go to the bank and say, here I need 70, 80, 90% of the value of that note. They buy for or lend against that note, and they give me the money, and I go out and do another one. And so in a perfect world, none of my borrowers have any issues, but especially now, some of them do have issues. And so if I have a borrower that's not paying, then the bank, doesn't like that. So having liquidity is key, but there's good debt and bad debt. You probably heard that, right? Fixed debt is what kills you. And so the reality is if you want things or you want to, do stuff in life, you're going to have, whether it's your car or your house, but it's managing, not just because the bank said I could get 100% financing on my house. That's what I'm going to do. That's what got a lot of people in trouble in 2008 is the bank let them do as much as they wanted. And if the bank, they know, so I can't, that's not a problem. So that's the bad debt. The good debt, if that's a word, is when you're using it to make money. So I'm buying a rental property for $100,000 and maybe I get the bank to finance some of that. And then my cash flow every month is $2,000. Well, the $2,000 pays the bank, pays the taxes, the insurance, and leaves me with a little left over. So my renter is going to pay down my bank balance, and there's enough cushion in there. If something goes, the toilet leaks, or I got to fix the roof, there's enough in there, and then having some liquidity. So that's how you use good debt. I don't know what Dave Ramsey's opinion is on good or bad debt.
No, I guess his opinion is no debt, no debt, no debt.
Right.
And I don't necessarily agree with that either, but you need to be careful, you need to be smart. You need to know your numbers, right, and make sure you're using it wisely.
Yeah. Would you say that being over levered is the number one problem, or are there other things that get the average person in trouble? Just things that they're learning the hard way.
Over leverage can get if it's not number one, it's probably top two.
Yeah.
For getting people in trouble, but it's hard. What is over levered? Everybody's situation is different. I see it again with my kids, and I was the same way. You're 25 or whatever, and you see and you want it now. Everything I want is now. I want it, and they don't understand. People like me, I've been working 7 days a week and grinding for 30 years, and so it just doesn't come quick. But when people see that, they're okay. I want that tomorrow, and so having a lifestyle, what did I see today? I can't remember who said it, but I don't know if you know who Jackie Burke is. but he owns Champions Golf Club, and he just turned 100. And so I think I was reading before we got in here, he has a lot of sayings, and one of them he has, I think on his refrigerator, it said 50 and 51. Okay, what does that mean? Well, if you make $50, don't spend $51.
Right.
Simple, kind of corny, but right to the point. It's pretty.
Yeah. So that's interesting because, leverage in good times is a very good thing, but in bad times wipes people out. And what the last couple of years with the amount of money floating around, everybody kind of kept thinking that this is normal, and we know it's not. And going back to your bank days, your underwriting days, your credit days, you've seen cycles. And what we're seeing now with where the liquidity is going right now, there's definitely a contraction, right? You're seeing that. And so this idea that they could just borrow money for cheap forever is just not going to happen. And so what advice would you give to somebody who says, you know what, okay, I see all the mistakes that could be made. I know I need to go probably get a mentor or partner with somebody that's done this. What is one piece of advice that you would give somebody who says, you know what, I have some extra cash. I want to get into this. I want to try my luck here. What would you say to them?
I don't know if I could say just one thing.
Okay.
You know what? So my dad was an entrepreneur, and so it's in my blood. And although I worked for a bank for a long time, that's probably the anti-entrepreneur. But I knew someday, somehow, and I always was doing some stuff on the side, if you will, because it was just in my blood. And so when he and I talked, it was always about business and work and entrepreneurship. And my first job was counting inventory for him, and I painted, and I was a pipe fitter in the summers, and he owned a machine shop. And so part of that, to answer your question, is you kind of either have the mentality that you want to be an entrepreneur or not. And it's not for everybody. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you just got to have the mentality. And it's a little bit of a riverboat gambler mentality, controlled. And so to me, if you want to be an entrepreneur, don't quit your day job, but find out what you like. Whatever. I like doing websites, building websites. I like doing whatever you can make money at. Podcasting.
Right.
I know I'm making a ton of money doing this. So do that on the side, if you will. And then do I like it? Can I make money at it? And then when you think, hey, that leap is hard. There's no doubt about it. For me, I was lucky enough where I waited. I'm not advising people to wait, but back to your fixed cost, you got to get your costs right. So I figured if this failed, one, I could probably go get a job somewhere, but two, my wife thinks different, but I could eat Doritos and live under a bridge just to make it work. I'm okay with that. So part of that though is getting your fixed costs right and knowing, in your mind, and I guess, the plumber has leaky pipes, the dentist has whatever. I never did a budget, but I kind of knew in my mind, here's my monthly, and so I got to make this, and it probably gets me to where I need to be. So I never did anything formal. You should do a formal budget. But again, do something first before you make if you want to be an entrepreneur, before you make that big leap. And then so there's not just one answer. Find somebody. There's meetup events. There's people in the industry. I've found, especially older guys, we like helping people. I don't have an issue helping somebody if they're genuine and they want to learn. But a lot of you can't learn on HGTV. So, you got to stick your toe in the water. And I did. And, some of them are bloody right now, but that's the only way you learn how to swim is you got to so that's the other thing. You can't be afraid to do some kind of action. And then, yes, people are important. And there's again, for me, what's it called? Have you ever heard the term, you need bail? I need a banker. I need an accountant. I need an insurance person, and I need a lawyer.
Ah,
okay.
Interesting.
I haven't heard that either. Bail. Okay.
All right. Well, we got something new now. That's what bail is. Bail in a good way.
Yes. So that's my nugget.
Yeah.
One of them, at least. So there's a lot. But yes, people are, at the end of the day, people are important. So if I wanted to be an attorney, what would I do? Obviously, go to law school. But I talk to a lot of attorneys. Hey, do you like what you do? Are you a litigator? Are you a transaction guy?
Right.
how to money good? Can I get rid? All those things. Figure out the business from people, and I'm sure you'd be happy to. People are happy to share their experience.
Oh, yeah.
Information contained in this podcast and accompanying video have been derived from sources believed to be reliable. This content is not guaranteed as to its accuracy and does not purport to be a complete analysis of the topics discussed. Analysis is based on assumptions that may not come to pass. None of the content should be construed as legal or investment advice. You should consult with a qualified professional before implementing any strategies discussed. All expressions of opinion reflect the judgment of the speakers on the date the video was recorded and are subject to change.